the theme today is driving, so I can come in and road test some strategies with you so you can see them and shop before you purchase. Just saying. So the last couple of weeks I was sitting down with my husband and we were talking about cartoons, and I said, what were your very favorite cartoons when you were a kid? And without hesitation he said, Bugs Bunny cartoons. And I said, me too, those were my favorite. And so we decided to talk about what made those our favorite cartoons when we were kids. And we talked about the good music, kind of classical music, the good writing, kind of intellectual writing, and the humor. That's what made those our favorite cartoons. And so I was looking at some of the YouTube cartoons, and you know, those classic cartoons have that. You ever seen those snowballs? They start out at the top of the mountain, they roll, and they get bigger, and somebody gets clobbered at the bottom. So I was looking up cartoons, and I found what it's called. It's Bugs Bunny, sorry. Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Daffy Duck, they're always antagonists. Anyway, so it's called The Iceman Ducketh, and it's starring Daffy Duck. So Daffy Duck's at the top of the snowy mountain, he's peering down, he's got a pebble, and Bugs Bunny's at the bottom. So he takes his pebble and tosses it down, and he watches down the snowy mountain, and it starts to accumulate snow and build and get bigger and bigger, and pretty soon it's this massive ice ball of destruction. And then down at the bottom he's waiting, and boom, it misses Bugs Bunny, goes into a cave of 3 hibernating bears, and Wallop gets the bears, and the bears have limbs sticking out of the giant snowball. And then, of course, if you haven't watched Bugs Bunny cartoons, it's going to catapult. So it catapults and lands on Daffy Duck, and the angry bears come out. Well, anyway, all that to say, those snowball cartoons made me think about our students and how I wonder sometimes if they feel like the giant snowball of destruction is chasing them. And it starts out kind of small, with maybe a missing assignment or a late work, or maybe a grade that's not their very best effort. And over time, that snowball starts to accumulate. And maybe they sense some fear when they see that coming behind them. Maybe they start to panic when they feel that snowball crushing down on them. So I'm hoping that with our new grading and assessment thinking we're doing, that maybe that will prevent that little snowball from becoming such a large path of destruction for our students, and instead they can feel some success. So today our theme is the road, and Dr. Wiles asked those of us who attended the conference in Portland to share a few strategies that we learned, and he told us, he warned us in fact, he said, start small. Just choose a couple and use baby steps. So, since we have the road theme, I'll say that I chose a couple of strategies to test drive. And kind of like when you see a car sitting on the car lot, and it looks really pretty, and it looks good on paper, and it sounds okay, but until we get behind the wheel and drive it for ourselves, we don't know if it's going to work for us. So I chose 3 strategies this past year to test drive in my classroom. So I'm going to share those with you today, as well as the results of a survey that you were gracious enough to take. So I sent out a survey that asked you to rank some grading and assessment practices using a Likert scale, 1 through 5. And you said 1 if you strongly disagreed, and 5 if you strongly agreed. Now really the purpose of this was just to get a feel of our current practices and our current thinking. There were no right or wrong answers, but I thought it might be interesting for us to take a look at where we're at. So the first question was asking about our students knowing their learning targets, or knowing what's going to be on the test or in the final grade. And our collective school ranked that at a 3.93, which leans towards agree. The second question was about redos without penalties, and our ranking on this question was 3.90, so just about to agree if we were to find the mean of those. Next question, I award bonus points for extra credit. And 2.59 was where we came on that one, so closer to the disagree. Question 4, I include homework performance in the final grade, and our collective score 3.39, so kind of in the middle range. Oops. Skip one. Question 5, I include group scores for individual grades. Our ranking was 2.32, so a disagree on that practice. Question 6, I reduce points for late work, 2.50, so closer to the disagree. Question 7, I keep separate track of my students' formative and summative. And of course, we completed this survey before the Dream Team's visit, so that played into that result, I'm sure. But we were 3.78, so most of us agree. I include one or more of the following in grades: tardiness, participation, attendance, or following class rules. Our collective score 2.26, close to disagree. I deduct points for attitude and effort, 2.13, so disagree. Last, I include zeros in grades for missing work, and our collective score was 2.82, so closer to the disagree. I thought those were interesting. Now again, that's our entire school, so that can get watered down a little bit, finding the mean, but it's interesting. All right, the problem with penalties. I love this quote. I have not failed, I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. What a great outlook on failure. And I thought that tied in with our Dream Team visit on Friday, talking about that growth mindset. And penalties was one of the first strategies that I tried in my classroom this past year. In the past, I would deduct points for late work, messiness, no names. I really just didn't have a system for dealing with those, so I would just randomly choose some points that sounded fair and take those off. And that had worked for me for several years without any complaints. Were there any improvements with that system? Probably not, but it made me feel better. But the problem with penalties, we've learned on Friday when Aaron shared with us in his great video, is that penalties are sometimes used as a punishment. I think I found myself in that category. Not that I was meaning it to be a punishment, but I felt like, well, that will take care of that for you, and it took care of it for me, so we're good. But Aaron shared with us that that's not the right way, and in fact, research on growth mindset and motivation shows that when we use penalties, it's not a motivator, especially in any higher level learning. It has the opposite effect. So that plan backfired. All right, well, one of the speakers at the conference was Myron Dweck, and I know Dr. Wiles has met him and talked about him, and I promise I'm not trying to sell his book, but this is such a helpful book. One of the reasons I like it, besides the fact it's written by Myron, who is the best speaker ever, very entertaining and lively, but it's a practical book with application for your classroom, and it's full of excellent forms that you can print, and I will give you a form today in your box that you can use already. Myron used to be a teacher. He's now a vice principal in Canada, and you'll get to hear his accent in a minute. But he lays out the problem with penalties in a really clear and understandable way in a short video clip. He's talking about penalties that he used as a parent at home, and we'll find out if those penalties worked.
It's my son who probably taught me more about what a person should consider around penalties than anybody. I'll make this quick. I said to Elijah one time, hey, go start brushing your teeth. I mean, we gotta remind you every night, this is getting annoying. So I know you're collecting quarters, so I'm gonna take away, it's gonna cost you $1 every time you forget to brush your teeth. He goes, all right. So he heads around the corner and turned to my wife and go, hey, successful parent. And he comes around the corner and corners where he slapped 7 quarters into me. He goes, I'm good for a week. And my wife goes back to me, successful parent, eh? And in that moment, my son Elijah taught me something about penalties that I've wondered for a while. Number one, if the penalized person doesn't care about the penalty, it's not going to work. Clearly he didn't care. He'd gladly give up some quarters. Number two, it didn't fit my need. Like, I wasn't trying to benefit financially from my son's tooth decay, right? I was hoping to be brushed his teeth, but that wasn't occurring either. With my new family paradigm. And third question would be, how often do you have to use the penalty? And if you're using it on a regular basis, something isn't working. You're building more prisons, something's wrong. And lastly, this is most powerful for me, is the penalized person who controls the variables? Meaning, for my son, maybe not. Does he know what tooth decay is? Does he know what a dentist bill feels like? I don't know. Probably not. So is he really in the best position to make that decision? Now, if we take this to the grading arena, teachers give out zeros and late deductions like they're candy half the time, and students don't care. Only when I stopped giving zeros in my classroom did I have students come up and say, hey, can I just take a zero on that? They're like, no, you actually have to do it. Please? I'll buy you lunch. Just give me a zero. And it's like, okay, I don't think those were all that effective if students are quite willing to take them. They don't fit my overall aim. I want to grade learning, not compliance. How often do I use them? Using them all the time. And lastly, how do you professionally apply a penalty, like a grading penalty, a zero or a late deduction, to a student who has to work till midnight so their family can afford their rent? How do you apply a grading penalty to a student who's had their utilities cut off? And we don't know what's all going on in our students' lives, but I think whatever we do in our schools around grading and assessment, we better have systems that fit, systems that apply to catching those students who are having difficulties outside of school. And some of those difficulties, many unfortunately, will never ever know about. So I think a lot of what my book has to talk about is how do we build systems that are robust for all learners, those on the lowest end of the spectrum, those on the highest end of the spectrum, that will work for everybody.
All right, so Myron's book does contain one form that I'll give you today. That's a form you can have your student fill out if they have any late work. And the form puts the responsibility on the student for them to analyze, well, why was this late? What was the reason behind my late work? And what's the strategy for turning it in on time next time? And what's my action plan for getting it turned in? So it puts responsibility on the student instead of you. And as Harry Wong likes to say, whoever's working harder is learning more. So let's let that be the student. And second of all, I did implement, this was one of the strategies I test drove in my classroom last year, and I found that penalties for things like no name, well, it made me have to maybe ask some students, was this yours? But I found that really that was I was using that as a punishment more, because when I released that point for no name, I found that I was a lot happier, and I thought, they're humans, of course they're going to forget to write their name. How many times do I forget to fill out a form completely on the computer and it sends back something in red? This part was not complete. And I just missed it. Well, that's no different than a student forgetting to write his name. We're human. And so that released that feeling of punishment from the teacher. So I test drove it and liked it. All right, so Myron does say if you're going to use penalties, to use CARE. And there you can see the acronym on the side. CARE, the penalty must evoke concern on the part of the learner. It needs to be important, it needs to matter, like he said, with his son. AIM, the penalty structure must align with the ultimate objectives of the teacher. So stopping to think about, why was I taking points off for no name? Reduction of undesirable behavior. I want the penalty to stop the behavior. When I was taking off 1 point for no name or 2 points for late, was that increasing the student's desire to get their name and get it in on time? For me in 4th grade, it wasn't. And I knew that because I kept data all year long whenever there was a student with late work. And really, it was the same students that had that pattern of late work and and 2 points really didn't make a difference. And last, empowerment. The student needs control over what they're going to do to fix the problem. And this is a copy of the form that you'll get a copy of today. The next strategy that I test drove was getting rid of the zero. And I thought the Dream Team Friday did such a great job already sharing this, so I won't go over it in depth. But just the fact that the zero doesn't work mathematically if we're looking at a 100-point grade system. So from A to B, 10-point increment. B to C, 10. C to B, 10. D to F, 10. And then we've got almost a 60% gap of F-dom, where it's just F, and that just doesn't work for students mathematically. So talking about what is the most appropriate consequence for students who fail to complete an assignment. The Dream Team did a great job of giving examples of what they did. For me, I'll give you an example because this is a strategy I tried last year. And I was really against it at first. You need to know this. I thought there's just no way. If a student doesn't do the work, they need to be held accountable. And they do. And that's not what this is saying. This is what I did in my class. I had a student who was one of my habitual late students, and I knew that from the data. And he didn't turn in some spelling assignments. Now, he was doing just fine on the tests, and he really could spell pretty well as a student. I put him at a B student. He wasn't an A+, but a B student. He could spell. And so he didn't turn in some spelling assignments, which were, I'm sure, super fantastic and challenging and enriching and really made him stretch outside the box for his learning. No, he didn't. Anyway, they didn't. And so he didn't turn them in. And it killed me. I held him accountable. He missed a Friday free time, and I put it in red web as a 0, so that the communication that went home to the parents saw a 0, and it gave him a little bit of a panic. And I kept on him to get those assignments turned in. I emailed home, and those fantastic spelling assignments didn't come in, and he kept doing well on the tests. So at the end of the quarter, when they didn't come in, I put an I in red web, incomplete. So his final grade was on his tests, on his big assignments, and the assignments he turned in, but it didn't factor in the daily works that didn't get turned in. And it really did kill me, you need to know that. I felt really guilty and weird, but was it more of an accurate assessment of how he could spell? I believe it was. So, what's that? And the final strategy that I implemented was allowing students to, well, I'll tell you in a minute. So this is a conveyor belt. And some people say that our educational system is kind of like a conveyor belt, and not necessarily like the good Krispy Kreme kind of frosting. Our conveyor belt kind of spits out like these boxes, and the students get put on the conveyor belt at maybe pre-K, and they go on through the system, and we think, well, by a third quarter of pre-K, they really should learn this, and then we keep going, get to kindergarten, well, by second quarter, they certainly need to know this. And they continue on this conveyor belt through graduation. But all along the line, there are some students who maybe don't hit those milestones or don't learn certain concepts at the time they're supposed to on the conveyor belt, but they keep going through. And I think that this last assessment strategy that I chose to test drive helped this problem, and it is allowing students to have redos. Now I'm going to share a short video clip, and this is by Rick Wormeli.
Wormeli.
And I say that wrong every time. And Rick, we'll call him Rick. Rick has some great strategies for allowing redos and retakes, but I need to caution you, there is a bad word. I'm so sorry, I would never use this word. It's B-U-T-T.
We're safe.
Some administrators and teachers might be worried that students would abuse this policy of retakes and do-overs. And there's some things you can put in place to make sure that doesn't happen. But think for a minute about this. Let's take the example of a student who meets all the deadlines. I mean, really, follows all the rules, and on Friday turns in his project. He worked his butt off. On Friday, he's buttless. Now imagine a kid who blew it off. Tempted by other things, whatever it was, he turns to something that's really close to garbage. He gets like a D or an F or a very low value score. But over the next 2 or 3 weeks, he keeps up with his sports and music and family and the curriculum and the rest of the classes he takes. But he has a bit of a life-transforming experience, and he actually goes back and he does the project properly. And he resubmits it, and he gets an A. What do you think the first student feels towards me as the teacher and towards the classmate? Resentment? Anger? None of it. It's 100% indifference. Because the kid who had a B and goes back and redoes the project to get an A only has a small step to take. B, B+, A- kids are allowed to redo things. How dare any teacher stand in the way of a child wanting to achieve excellence? He's got this small step. That other child had to go on with his life, all those pressures, and do the previous curriculum and the project. He wasn't getting a treat. He wasn't getting away with anything. There's no sense of, hey, that's not fair. They're sort of like, oh man, you should have used your time more wisely. And so you don't have that complaint. And there's hope in the equation. Kids raise their hands, they do assignments, they sit down in chairs. When teachers tell them to sit down, because there's hope. Not because of fear, it's because there's hope for me here. So we want to do that, but we don't want the students to walk all over us. So some of the things we put in place, well, I would suggest that all retakes be done with 3 magic words. At teacher discretion. It's not to be taken for granted. So you send home your grading policies at the beginning of the year. Have parents and the students sign off that they have read and understood, not read and agreed. That's beyond the purview of the parent. It's read and understood, those policies. So everybody knows that this is not something you just automatically get. It's situational, and I get to decide that. That's one protective sense. But also, kids have to submit to you a calendar of completion. For instance, if the redo is going to be done with all the other work, and let's say the redo is coming in on Friday, well, they actually have to map it out. Little squares on a piece of paper or a computer of some sort. What are you going to do on Wednesday? So you do stuff on Thursday, so you do stuff on Friday, and turn it in on Friday. Or maybe start with Monday, each step of the way. They have to also submit to you kind of a way they're going to relearn the material. That can be outlined in the calendar. Like I've had students, did you study for the test? Yeah. Well, what did you do to study for the test? I read it. Well, then what'd you do? I looked away. How's it working for you? Probably isn't working very well. So that's to be relearning before there's reassessing. So usually beginning of the year and throughout the year, we make a list of at least 20, hopefully 25 or more, different ways to study for tests. And I need to see proof of this, because whatever you did before wasn't working. So on the relearning portion, I need to see an outline of what you're going to do. 4 or 5 things pulled from that list. Most teachers can create that list with their students. Things like make flashcards, record things, have people test you, do a little 3x5 note card, all your notes on one side of the note card, when you capsule and learn it better. All these great studying tools. Well, they create that list, they pull 4 from there, and you see the evidence of it, and then you can redo it. Now, what if the test is large and complex? It weaves together lots of content and skills. They're going to have to redo the whole thing. But if your test is compartmentalized, and they did really well in this one section, but there's only this one other section did poorly, let them just redo that one section. Everything else is banked. They don't have to redo it. This ends up meaning that sometimes my retakes, my do-overs, are just a 7-minute interview back at my desk while the rest of the class is working on something. It wasn't something where I had to move heaven and earth and design a whole new test in order to actually do the redo. Now, there are some tests I would need to redo all over. Remember, there's 2 types of tests, and this will help you. There's forced choice, and there's constructive response. Forced choice is like true, false, matching, multiple choice. The kids choose from what you gave them. Well, if that was the retest, the kid might come in just memorizing answer pattern. He might come in that day for the redo, CCC, CCC. Oh, give me the test before I forget the pattern. Learning is a little fragile there. So reserve the right to give a different format. I tell all my kids that's in my policies. I might use a different format, and it might be actually more complex and more demanding of you. Whereas before it was multiple choice, now it's cold, off the top of your head. Explain it all. There's no prompting for me. And that gets into constructive response, like run the mile, compare two pieces of poetry in light of these categories. You're supposed to know that stuff ahead of time, and you went back for the redo and actually learned the stuff. I still win as your teacher. You learned the stuff just like you should have the first time. So I can actually give the exact same prompt the second time around because you're supposed to learn that thing, whatever it was. I also have kids write letters to me. What did you do differently between the first attempt and this subsequent attempt? And how are you different as a learner? Would you learn about yourself as a learner? Sometimes I write that letter to parents as well. There are a lot of hoops through which they jump. And they realize it's just easier if I keep up and don't have to do redos, which is exactly what good scholars do. One thing I do to protect myself is I don't allow any redos or do-overs the last week of the marking period. Because that's when I'm just kind of going crazy with report cards and closing things down. It's just too nutso. So if it's a 9-week period, 8 weeks I allow these redos. And the last week, no, I don't do that. Why is that? It's just me. I'm trying to protect me and my family. But you know, if I ever go to a kid and say no redos, I actually have said those 3 things I said were unacceptable. It's okay if you don't learn this. This assignment had no value, and you didn't do it, so now you're off the hook. Turns out when I do that, it's a bitter pill to swallow. So some weeks later, I usually approach the kid and say, all right, how about going back and relearning this stuff? And I'll give you full credit. You see, the truth is, it doesn't matter when in an entire school year a child learns something. He learns it this week, 3 weeks, 3 months later. It matters that he learns it. And if you hold a kid accountable for learning this one thing this week, or this one day is the only day you have to demonstrate mastery, you're hiding behind the factory model school that doesn't work. Some teachers will rationalize, well, they don't do this at upper grade levels, so we're not going to do it here, because we're trying to prepare them for the upper grade levels. What those teachers are really saying, whether it be high school teachers talking about college, career training, or military, whether it be middle school teachers talking about high school, elementary talking about middle, doesn't matter. What they're all saying is, these students are going to be exposed to inappropriate, miserable conditions later. So I'm going to make them miserable now so they're used to misery all along. This is not a tenable position by a highly accomplished professional educator. The things that best prepare them for college, or for high school, or for middle school, or whatever grade level it is above the level you teach, is if they know their stuff. And to not let them learn their stuff. To hold them accountable for this preposterous approach, this conveyor belt. You're 11, you learn this. You're 12, you learn this. Kind of approach to pedagogy we know doesn't work is actually reckless and irresponsible on our part. The best thing I can do for kids is to teach them well, to incorporate sound pedagogy. And I won't sacrifice any kid's instruction, his learning, just to protect some policy about retakes or redos. I'm going to have to step up to the plate.
So that was the last strategy that I implemented in my classroom last year, and I want you to know that I didn't make a proclamation to my students about any of these. I didn't get up and say, okay, you can redo anything you want, or turn in anything late when you want, or there will be no zeros. I didn't announce that. That was just my style. This was just a subtle test drive. I wanted to try it out as the driver who runs that classroom and see first how I liked it and how it worked and what results I saw with my students. And I did allow redos without announcing it on summative assessments if I felt like, man, I don't want that student to move on because I didn't think they learned it. So we worked to give them a chance to redo. And the parents like that too, I think. Gave him that hope. He talked about that fear versus hope. And I think that's a piece that gives us hope even as adults when we're allowed to redo something. We have a second chance. It's not our best. It wasn't our best day. We were tired or we had something going on at home. It's just a good feeling. And like Carrie Mom says, whoever's working harder learns more. And I think what you just heard, I hope what you heard, is that he doesn't take away those high expectations. He ratchets the high expectations up because students aren't getting the free card of, oh, well, they're being held to higher standards. So I liked how he said it better, but that's okay. So these are just some of his philosophies, and I'm going to send you this link, so I won't read through them because I know it's late. But just what he's saying is high standards, high standards, high standards. And more high standards. Students aren't getting off the hook. So with this assessment, I've really had I don't like the word paradigm shift, it's kind of a pet peeve, but I have had a paradigm shift. When I used to have my old philosophy, I think that there was only a choice between success and failure, and it was always a choice. It was two different roads, if you will. And to choose those roads, you had to get on that road and stay on it. And as a parent, I even was teaching my girls that way. You've got to be successful, stay on the right path. And I think that what happened in my mind was I realized that success is our goal always, student success. But can we allow some time in there for some failure to get to that point? Can we allow some time to take away the fear of failure and give them the hope that it's okay to take risks, it's okay to try, it's okay to have different opportunities to practice. That's what we're here for. And as an adult, I want those opportunities to try things too and to take risks without the fear of failure. So the paradigm shift that I've had, there it is that maybe the road to success is the same road as failure. And maybe when I get on that road, the one and only road, I just need to know that there will be failure. And maybe that gives me a little bit more hope when I get to success.